architect with Canopy, and he is going to give a presentation on a concept plan. After that presentation, we're going to take questions and answers from people, do some kind of brainstorming, and put some ideas together, see what feedback you have. So are we good, Kayla? Technology. Just a few housekeeping. If anybody needs to use the restroom, it's through the door that you came in and directly across the hall. There's two restrooms there. This is being live streamed, so if you want to go back and watch anything, you can certainly do that. We'll have that up on the Parks and Recreation and Parks and Marina website afterwards. I am going to pass out comment sheets. If you were here for the first meeting, we did it a little bit differently. We had a comment box in the back. But I'm going to pass those out, or you can grab one on the way out and you can just mail it in or drop it off at City Hall. I'm also going to leave the comment period open until Friday, August 10th, I think is a week from tomorrow. So you can drop those off. Actually, that's the 12th. So the comment period will be open until August 12th at 4 o'clock. You can either email me, my email address is on the Parks and Marina website page, or you can drop off or mail in the comments on the comment sheet. So I'm going to turn it over to Barry. He's going to give a little history here, and then we'll get going with Eric. Thank you again for coming out.
It's great to see this many people at a public meeting for a potential park. I'm really excited about this whole process. Let me just give you a little bit of history, and a lot of you all may know this, but I think it's important for you to understand that as we go through this process. The site that we're looking at was actually cited to be an industrial park for the University of Delaware. And the University of Delaware decided not to do an industrial park there for whatever reason, and decided to lease it to the city of Lewis for recreation. They gave us a 20-year lease. That 20-year lease is up in 2025. We already have developed two recreation facilities in the park without a plan. I don't think that the state will allow us to continue any further without a plan. So those two facilities are the dog park and the garden plots. So anyway, we're required to do this plan. About two and a half years ago, myself and Rodney Robinson, who is also on the Recreation and Parks Board, were appointed by the Recreation and Parks Commission to manage this property and begin to develop a master plan. And so that's what we've begun to do. Somewhere around December or January of last year, we began to put together some specifications and program so that landscape architects and engineering firms could give us a bid on developing a plan. And we chose Pannoni because of the cost and also their background. This is the second of 3 public meetings. The first meeting, we solicited input from the community. We asked the community, hey, what would you like to see? We kind of have a blank slate here. We have 2 facilities in there already, but how can we use this park or this land for the city of Lewis? The overwhelming response from that meeting was conservation and preservation, preserving what was there. Many of you talked about using it as an educational resource for children to teach them about the marsh and stormwater management and so on. So I think that's important to note. So this meeting is the second meeting, and Eric, with his firm, took that information from that last public meeting and began to come up with a concept. And that's what this meeting tonight is about, is looking at the conceptual plan that they've come up with. And keep in mind that this is just the beginning of the process. Are we going to see some of this developed the next year or something? Probably not. This is a 2, 3, 5-year process, maybe a 10-year process. Again, these are conceptual drawings. Engineering drawings have to come. There'll have to be cost estimates. I mean, there's all kinds of things that will have to happen after this. Once we get a conceptual plan and some kind of engineering drawings, then it'll probably be phased in. It's not going to happen all at once. It'll happen over a long period of time. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage for everybody so that everybody kind of understand the history of the property and where we've gone up until this point. So I would just like to turn it over to Eric, and he's got a whole bunch of slides to share with you and a lot of other information. Thank you. Thanks, Eric.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out in this heat. It's wearing on me pretty much here. Again, my name is Eric Wall. For those of you who were not at the meeting, the first meeting, I am a senior landscape architect with Pannoni. I am the president of the Delaware Native Plant Society, and I also have taught landscape design at Delaware Technical Community College in Georgetown. So welcome, and thank you again for attending the second public workshop. In this meeting, we will present a series of conceptual items for the Great Marsh Park in response to the public input from the first public meeting. You will be able to respond to these opportunities at the end of the presentation. But to get things started, let's briefly review the existing conditions and analysis from the last meeting. Next slide, please. So if some of you remember, this was the last board that we had shown at the first meeting, and this was an existing conditions and analysis plan that shows the boundaries of the Great Marsh Park, which is in yellow on the screen. And the red arrows show the vehicular traffic. Green arrows are where potential pedestrian walking or riding bikes could come from, the communities nearby. The blue in the center of the photo are the existing wetlands that were delineated on the property. Again, you'll see the dog park to the left of that, and the community garden is in the top left corner. Pardon me? A pointer? I do not have a pointer. I'm sorry. So we can go to the next slide. This is the summary of the public input from meeting number 1. This is the top 10 recommendations that were given at the meeting. And of course, number 1 was nature preservation. We also have no change to environment, walking trails, no removal of trees, no lights, educational codes, no development, minimal infrastructure impact, wildlife observation towers, and sculpture with viewing trails. So it's clear that preserving nature and minimizing impact is the clear vision for the park. Any activities should be passive, such as walking trails, educational areas, or observation opportunities for wildlife. Now, how can we create this vision for the Great Marsh Park? Next slide, please. So you'll see some of these images represent the boards that are along the side here of the room. These next few slides will illustrate conceptual ideas for the park in a layered perspective, meaning we will look at different themes and describe those areas in more detail, ending in a combination of all these layers of information into one concept plan. This is reminiscent of a way landscape architects are taught in school. And if anybody is aware of this person's name, his name is Ian McCarg. He was a professor at University of Pennsylvania, and he came up with this layered system of information where you look at different items in the landscape, layer it on top of each other, and what's left in the areas that are least impactful is where you put your development. His book is called Design with Nature, if you're interested, and it's one of the go-to books for landscape architects and land planners. So this slide illustrates historical changes within the park. There are three main areas shown here, outlined in red. One is Old Field Succession, which I'll explain in a little bit, which is the bottom long oval. There's Ephemeral Wooded Wetlands, which is the square in the center. And there's Current Active Uses, which is to the left, which includes the dog park, the cross-country trail, and the community garden. Now, we talked about these areas at the last meeting under existing conditions. And a lot of this is wooded area. There's different types of ecosystems in each area. I'm going to talk about the one here right now where it talks about succession. I just mentioned that word. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the Great Marsh Park lies within a very unique area. Delaware consists of roughly 6 plant communities. In this spot, there's roughly a mixture of 2 of those communities, the northern pine oak forest and the southern mixed pine oak forest. These forest communities existed here prior to colonization and have given the opportunity a vacant field will evolve into these types of forests once again. That's called succession. As the name suggests, these forests are dominated by pines and oaks. Many times, an area will only include a few species specific to that area because of its conditions. The understory and the ground layers are dependent on how much sunlight comes through the canopy. So a lot of these evergreen trees we have are actually loblolly pine, and there's a lot of them there. And it's very common for something like this to happen. There's also oaks. The white oaks are more in the wet areas, and the red oaks are more in the upland areas. Next slide, please. I also had aerial photographs last time at the first meeting that covered from 1926 up to present day. So, and this is just a brief summary of the historical nature of the site. The area now known as the Great Marsh Park was once forested woodland and marshland prior to colonization. It was farmed as far back as 1926. Hedgerows planted at that time to delineate the fields can still be seen today, and they're consisted of Osage orange, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Over time, development within the park's boundaries was proposed with a potential research campus and residential community. However, these never materialized, but an access road was built, as you can see in the middle aerial photograph. Now preserved open space, Lewis Unleashed and the community garden have been established in the last decade within the Great Marsh Park. Okay, next slide. So the next layer of data that we're going to talk about is circulation. This plan shows both vehicular and pedestrian circulation. The thick red dashed lines represent where the cars go. The black dashed lines are existing walkways, such as sidewalks, the cross-country trail, etc. The solid, thinner black lines represent potential trails or links to other areas within the park. The magenta circles indicate potential gathering areas, Walking trails in and around the wetlands could be potential raised boardwalks or a bridge over the ditch that's existing right there now. So on this slide, I heard a lot of questions being discussed when looking at the boards. So this is just purely conceptual, and because walking trails were part of the likes from last time, we decided to show some of these potential trails in and throughout the park. Now, as you can see, they would go through existing wooded areas. That doesn't mean that we're going to clear cut the area. Any of these trails would be field located, which means we would have a group of people go out and actually walk where we want to walk in between the trees. The trails could be soft, like mulch, or like along the part of the trail that's there around the dog park, existing pine needles, which is a soft surface. Or I would recommend, and we'll get into this later, any hard surface trails or areas would be closer to the active uses in the park, existing active uses like the dog park. So can we go to the next slide, please? So now these ideas are just potential ideas, just to get the brain flowing here. You'll see here the boardwalk that I show. Now some of these images I have taken and some are from the internet resources. So the left image you see here, and that is actually a raised boardwalk up at Abbott's Mill Pond up in Milford. And it takes you through a wetland area. There's a tall canopy there consisting of maples, black gum, and a lot of actually Atlantic white cedar, which is kind of rare. The image to the right of that with the loop of twigs or vines, that could represent a soft trail that can go underneath and you can experience that piece as you walk through it. And then down below is another boardwalk with an overlook, which is also part of the desires on the list. Observation towers, observation decks. I also want to talk a little bit about accessibility and another thing I like to call equity in the landscape. I just wrote an article about equity in the garden. So accessibility is when you have a public space like this, any hard surface that you walk on needs to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which means it's a certain slope, there's a cross slope, it has to be a durable surface, has to be safe. If it's just a walking trail that's mulch or pine needles or grass, it does not have to meet ADA guidelines. That's just how it is. The other part of that is equity, which we also like to talk about people on the scale of autism or not just physical disabilities, but mental capabilities. And they require things that feel safe or comfortable in spaces. No loud noises, maybe there's a textual thing that they can feel. People with limited eyesight, how do they experience the space? So all these things can go into the planning of your spaces that make it equitable to all people. So all means all, right? Next slide. So our next layer of information is education and art. Again, this was on the list of things that were desired for the park. This includes gathering spaces or educational opportunities along trails. And this plan combines these two aspects of education and art. So on the upper left-hand corner, and the board's over here for you to look at too later, there's three little symbols, G1, G2, and G3. So G1 are group seating and gathering areas that provide places for educational groups to gather, discuss, observe nature, or participate in activities. In G2, these are natural sculptures and art installations that provide visual interest and educational opportunities as well along the trails and pathways. And G3 are structures that may be dedicated to birding opportunities or wildlife observation. And these notes are also tied into the pictures that you see on the top right. Again, these are just images. A lot of them I've taken off the internet as a source, so this is a visual cue on what it could be. This is not like exactly what it's going to be. One of the gathering spaces, especially I foresee under the tall pines in the northern part of the park, is a council ring. We can go to the next slide too. Sorry about that.
You're good. I was trying to go.
That away.
So a council ring, as the top two pictures show, is a round seating area. It can be made out of stone or wood or brick or almost anything. It could even be as simple as tree logs that have been cut and turned on like a stump that you can sit on. And this goes back all the way to the Native Americans when they had council rings like this, where everybody had a voice at the table. They all felt equal around the circle. So their very first forms of democracy, basically. The other picture on the bottom left is just a simple pavilion. This would actually, in my mind, be close to the dog park, where all the parking is, the activity is. It could very easily be done accessible to get under the pavilion. And this could be a gathering place for educational activities, discussions about nature, or where you could start your start point to walk through all the trails if you want to meet up with your friends. And then we have a image of a art sculpture that's made out of natural twigs and branches. They sometimes call this environmental art. And there's some examples actually in Delaware, down at the Delaware Botanical Gardens, has a few of these, like they almost look like nests. But this could be a sampling of what could be installed in the park as a visual interest. It's art, but it's not a hard, durable thing that might need maintained or something like that. And I don't have the names of any particular artist in mind. I did come across 3 of them that seem to be very popular with things like this. My desire would be have somebody local that can do this. But if you're interested in looking on the internet for some stuff, Patrick Dougherty, Jacko Pernew, and Andy Goldsworthy came up in my search. Next slide, please. And then these are just a couple more examples. This is a bigger picture that's on the board of the birding structure. Like you could sit there and actually photograph or study birds up in the canopy. This is a rather large one. So this is just an idea. It could be something like this. It could be a simple area to sit around with a group of people actually just observing wildlife as they are. And then an observation deck or observation tower was suggested closer to the marsh so that you could like overlook into that marsh area. Next slide. Thank you. So environmental management plan is the last theme. It might be one of the most important aspects because it strives to preserve the existing conditions while also improving them. So we have this balance of preservation and conservation with how do we make it better. So it has to be like a balance between those two. This slide shows those potential areas where this could happen. So since I am part of the Native Plant Society, I always suggest to remove invasives. And there's a picture of that on the left. There's also a concrete swale existing in the park. One of my ideas to improve that is to remove the concrete and make it a bioswale. And I'll have a better picture in the next slide. There's also wetlands existing on the site. And why not make a few more like rain gardens, to help with storm management and actually have an educational piece to it that shows and demonstrates how the water flows through the park and why it's important for it to be going through these wetland systems. I also would like to clean up the Osage orange hedgerows, but keep them because that's a tie to our past at a certain place in time. And along the front entry of Park Road, there's a lot of invasives on that edge. And it might be nice to think about installing another type of ecosystem, which is a meadow. And I'll talk about that in a minute too. Next slide. So how do we do this? How do we preserve nature but also improve it? So one of these things is important to do is to remove the invasives. And why is this important? Because invasives can change the food web by replacing native food sources for our wildlife. They have no or very little nutritional value. They also crowd out the native species and can create monocultures. So if you look at the picture on the left, all those white blooms you see is the Bradford pear. And that's all along the edges of the park because that's what gets the most sun. And once they were disturbed, if Bradford pears are allowed to come in, they just take over, as many of you probably know. So recognizing our shared history through landscapes. Landscape elements can provide a link to our history at a specific time and place. The evolution or succession of a vacant field can educate us on the ever-changing landscapes that we inhabit. This picture is the Osage oranges, the large trees there that you see, and they're very architectural, and they're probably over 100 years old right now, because they were there before 1926. And so that is a tie to our history, and we should actually enforce that and celebrate that. Next page, or next slide. The importance of woodlands and a tall canopy layer. So why are they important? Well, tall trees, evergreen and deciduous, are carbon sequesters. They actually hold on to carbon. They're like a carbon sink, as are wetlands. They help to purify the water and the air. Wildlife habitat and food resources, especially for birds. Oaks, by chance, are the most important. If any of you are familiar with Doug Ptolemy, the oak species is host to the most number of caterpillars, which the birds need to feed on to survive. They also produce oxygen and other ecosystem services. And I mentioned ecosystem services, I think, last time. Next slide. So ecosystem service is a direct or indirect benefit to us all and the planet that is produced in these separate ecosystems. So it can be producing oxygen, it can be producing food, it can be flood mitigation in the wetlands, it's going to be soil, preserving the soil from erosion. So it can be a lot of these things are indirect and direct. And all these different ecosystems benefit us in different ways. So the importance of wetland ecosystems, water quality and flood protection, habitat and food resources for amphibians and other wildlife, and specialized plants that only exist in wetlands that exhibit both aquatic and terrestrial qualities, like the blue flag iris that can stand wet feet, which means it can be saturated in the roots, but then when the water goes down, it can still be happy without the water there. The importance of upland meadows. So it's key food and nesting source for numerous birds and other wildlife. It's habitat and food resources for invertebrates and our native pollinators. Also water infiltration and other ecosystem services. So these pictures, the top picture you see with some pink flowers in the background, that's actually that's rose mallow. It's a native shrub. It's also called perennial hibiscus. That's happy around wetland areas. There's actually some of this planted in Canal Front Park. And that is a wetland, a created wetland that you're looking at outside the new hospital up in Milford. If you're ever up that way, there's a traffic circle behind the hospital, and this is in the center of it. And it's actually part of the stormwater management system. The middle picture is a vegetated bioswale. So something like this could happen if we took the concrete out in sections, maybe not the entire thing, but maybe just a portion of it could be converted into a bioswale. And then the bottom picture is a meadow with some forested woodlands behind it. This is also up at the Milford Hospital, kind of behind the traffic circle. They established this meadow there, and it's quite beautiful. At different times of the year, it changes colors and stuff like that. And if you're wondering why I have Milford pictures, it's because I live in Milford. Next slide, please. So this is the last board to my right, and this is the composite concept plan. So this is taking all these different layers and kind of combining it onto one layer. We talked about the hedgerows, which on this board, these green lines vertically are the hedgerows, and it actually goes up towards the community gardens as well. And those are Osage orange. We like to keep those and maybe clean up the area around them. I guess I'll just walk over here with my notes. We have some edge conditions that need cleaned up. And that's the edge along the road here that have invasive species. And then this area here that kind of undulates back and forth with orange cross-hatching. That's where my idea of if you move the invasives, you're already disturbing that area. So why not establish a meadow? So when you're driving on Park Road through here, you're actually driving through a meadow. And I think that would be quite a wonderful feeling, experience. There's the existing wave sculpture in the beginning of the park. I guess it's what the University of Delaware used to have. But why not kind of emulate that wave and have this undulating layers of meadow? And the meadow itself is planted with grasses and native wildflowers that also sway and wave with the wind. So I think that would be a nice attraction to go through and experience in your car. There's also the existing sidewalk where you can bike or drive or walk through the meadow. The wetlands, these light blue areas are the existing ones. So I'd like to benefit on that too and actually create more wetlands or rain gardens per se. The darker blue areas here. So that could be an educational piece that can be described in like an informational sign somehow, right near the parking area. And it would take water through the system. The concrete swale that's existing is right here, and it goes all the way back. Can you hear me now?
A little late for me, but sorry.
So, again, the concrete swale, maybe we just look at a certain portion of it, maybe just this piece here that comes out and make it into a biofiltration swale. But these different rain gardens can actually benefit not only wildlife and the ecosystem that it's part of, but it can be beautiful, it can be functional, and it can demonstrate how the water flows through the site, which is very important for a coastal town like Lewis. This also shows the circulation that you saw before. The red is the vehicular circulation, the black is pedestrian. On this plan, we didn't really talk about parking before, but we need to, ask the question, do we need more parking? Will we need parking? I mean, will more people come to this down the road as population grows? Will it become a gem, a showpiece for Lewis that people want to experience? So we don't want to go over budget. We don't want to go over, overboard with parking. We already have existing parking around the circle, right? So improve that parking and maybe have some more spaces along it down to where the wetlands are. Then that parking, it could be gravel or, it might be paved, but we can actually direct any runoff into the wetlands that we create and explain that with informational, educational signage. So it's a really, I think, an important tool for people to understand, the importance of how the water is on the site, how it goes through the site, and how it can be filtered and returned back to, the aquifer or back to the marsh. We also have a potential parking area for the community garden. If the community garden ever expands, it can only go kind of in one direction, which is this pink rectangle. So if it ever does get bigger, that's really the only way it can go bigger, right? Right now, people park off the road there on the side, and we kind of want to steer clear from that, from my understanding. So what we thought we could do is actually have a small access road and put the parking behind the Osage orange hedgerow. So you're kind of hiding it from Park Road, but it's just enough spaces for the community gardeners to park at, and you can actually walk through the hedgerow to the garden. We also show the gathering areas, the magenta circles, with the potential links around. Again, these are just ideas, after this is done, you can feel free to say, too much, there's too many gathering areas, there's too many art things. That's what this is for, because we really want the public's input on how this is progressing. We want your ideas and your comments. And then, I think that's almost it. I didn't really talk about this central area. This is where the pavilion might go, if we want one, because this is, the active uses of the park right now. And it'll be the most opportune space. If we were to have something like that, this would be very easy to put it there without impacting the rest of the site. So, with that, Janet, do you want to talk any more about anything, or?
No, thank you, Eric. That was very comprehensive and very thoughtful planning based on our first meeting. So I think at this point, what we'd like to do, first of all, I'd like to say there was a lot of information that was just provided to you. For me, it takes a little time to digest and look at again and do a little research. So I encourage you to do that. And again, I encourage you to take a comment form or email me with your thoughts. But what we'd like to do now is hear from you, your initial reaction on what you've heard, what you liked, what you didn't like. And what I'm going to do is, like is green, dislike is red. And spelling doesn't count for me. So we just want to open it up to you all. Please be kind and allow people to have their opportunity to voice their opinions, and we will go around and try and get everybody. We do have a little over an hour left, so there's plenty of time for everyone to be heard. And I just ask that we give everybody, their opportunity and be courteous and kind. So I will open it up. Yes.
You want
Can you
this?
just stand for us? And Barry, do you want to scribe?
I can scribe.
Or you want to do that? All right, you're probably a better speller than I am. All right.
So my name is Paul Collins. I'm currently president of Lewis Unleashed. It's the nonprofit organization that built the dog park out there. And I'll let you know that through our donors and everything, we spent almost $300,000 for the creation of that dog park. Some of the stuff you're proposing is on our leased area. So That's number one. Number two, we put in all of that parking. We cleared it, we put down the landscaping, we put down the gravel so that we would have an impervious surface to set that up. So that's all stuff that has been created by the dog park to have parking there. And by the way, we have almost 1,300 members. So parking is critical to us. For us to have another whatever, there in proximity to the park and share that parking area, that could create just, to me, a huge mess. And so our members pay to be a member of the dog park. So, we don't want to inconvenience them, as much as possible in terms of doing that. So just some major concerns on our part in terms of where we place some of these things and what might reasonably be done for parking around the park. So just expressing my concerns about that.
So is your parking comment a positive then? You want more, you want a little bit more
If
parking?
we can create more parking coming down Great
Yeah,
Marsh.
okay.
Okay.
We have inadequate parking now.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought I heard positive, but then I thought I heard negative, so, okay.
No, I mean, if we can come
Yeah.
down Great Marsh Circle and create more parking coming down there, then, that's a positive thing. The other area that's there is our construction entrance. That's a spot where it could be expanded to create more parking. So there's a potential for creating more. I'm just being, I don't want to share with what's there right now, if at all possible.
yeah.
Thank you.
I don't feel that we need to have congregational areas close to the homes and in the backyards of people's homes.
Okay.
Because it makes it unsafe for us.
Right.
And if the trees, and they have binoculars, they could be looking in our windows.
And this is by Canary Creek?
This is
Homes.
in the bottom left
Yeah, okay.
spot.
And Harbor, okay.
Yeah, that whole side, I mean, there's two spots there behind the Osage. I know someone that lives in that little house where there's a little square there. And so, I mean, our homes are there, and right now I have nothing on my windows because I want to look at the beautiful trees and everything out there. I don't want to look at people looking at me with binoculars.
Okay, good.
My name is Donna Beck. Just for clarity's sake, why is Park Road not wide enough for cars to be along there? Am I missing something?
I know the parking, they park off onto the grass area, off to the median. And when we were talking as a group, we were just informed, I was informed that that wasn't really a desired thing to do.
I think it's more of an aesthetic thing. Suppose we had no parking and everybody parked along Park Road. It wouldn't look very pleasant for a beautiful park. In general, when you do a park, you try to contain parking in an area that's not viewable. Is that right, Eric?
Yes.
So I think that's,
I would also add the safety concern, particularly during the busy summer months when big pickups with large boats are hauling down to the public boat launch. It's a safety concern. It's also a management issue with cutting cutting the grass along the roadways. If there's cars parked there, we can't get into that. So there's multiple issues with it.
Along with extra parking, if this becomes the gem that you clearly think it will, comes the need for bathrooms, and I've heard nothing mentioned about that at all.
At the last public meeting, that was kind of not warranted at this time, but as a planner, I'm always thinking ahead, and the most opportune spot to do that, if we were to put a pavilion in that area near the dog park, that would be the most central location to do something like that. So That would be my idea. But again, that wasn't really desired from the input of the public meeting number 1.
I mean, often parks will do the spot pots with the enclosures. I mean, Herring Point in Henlopen do that fairly successful. And that is an option, and we actually had that, bathrooms like that at Smith, where the farmer's market is. It's an option, and they can be enclosed with nice fences. It's a lot less expensive, you know. But it may be something down the road, next phase, whatever.
So is that something that you would like to see or not?
No, I'm concerned that if you have to put bathrooms in,
Okay.
it's a detriment to the environment.
Okay.
And not only that, it leads for people to go in there and do things that they should not be doing, and.
That's why
like
spot
they-
pots are good.
Like they, yeah, but they do that at Canopy.
We have issues already with people who park outside the dog park
Yeah.
and use that water hydrant outside, just spend the night there on vehicles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we already have issues
Yeah,
with
so-
folks. We've had a couple of break-ins
Yes.
in the past from people there. You know, so it's you know, it's a very isolated spot. So, you know, people come down there in vans or pickups or whatever, they park there, spend the night, use our water hydrant there.
Drink.
Disable the breakers on that so they can't get the electric off of the outlet, but,
On the subject, my name's Stephen Jack, the subject of toilets, I envision school children that want to come here to some of the local schools. In regards to that, that could be an issue too. If you have a large number of children, what would they do if they were in the park and had to do something?
And there's all kinds of environmental sanitation systems, and I'm sure Eric knows all about that. They don't use water, and
I believe they just installed something like that at Delaware Botanic Gardens, where it's like a self-composting type toilet.
Arlene Felicia, I live in Canary Creek. I think the plan is lovely. I love the meadow idea. My concerns are safety, because as you know, he alluded to, I mean, I live there, I ride my bike all the time, and sometimes, I mean, I've noticed even, you know, vehicles coming along Park Road around dusk, you know, stopping and starting. So my concern is what would be done, you know, what type of safety features. I think in terms of the facilities, you know, for equity, you do need to provide or think about that for the future. But I would definitely agree with like Barry's idea. I wouldn't hardwire any concrete bathrooms in there, because I think you're only opening up, you've seen even the library, the conditions of the bathroom here. They're not that old, and they're getting to the point where it looks like they need major repairs. So that's a big concern. And then timeliness too, what's gonna happen? Will there be locks put on? Even those, you know, portable, I mean, they're just things to think about. And my one question is, in terms of the sequence of things. So I know, like we alluded to, it's not gonna be happening next year. So what would be the first step? Like, how would it proceed, like, you know, logistically?
Well, the natural progression of this is a master plan with a master plan report. So we'll have similar boards like this to show the actual master plan with everything in its place that comes out of this meeting. And then a report that describes all that and then can set priorities. Because one thing that's awesome about a master plan is that once you have it, then you can attack things, you know, in certain areas, in certain pieces. And at the end, it won't look like piecemeal because you have this master plan that shows how it's going to look when all is said and done. So I think the next part of this is going to be, once we finally, you know, hammer down what you guys want, what you didn't like about this, and we can adjust the concept plan, then we can discuss amongst the committee about priorities, like what could we do first, and you know, what should we do first? What do we have the money for now? What are we going to have to fundraise for? So there's a lot of questions with that, but it'll be like a priority list of things to
Great,
happen.
Thank you. And the elevated boardwalk, I've been to Abbott's, it's
Oh,
wonderful.
yeah.
Jane and I are with the Lewis Community Garden, and we appreciate everything. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the possible potential for parking. One of our long-term goals is to have accessible beds for people in wheelchairs. So I'm wondering if that parking happens, would they be able to?
Yes, so, yes. Could you go back to the last slide, maybe? So up here in this corner, where we proposed a small drive back behind the hedgerow, I also show, and it's hard to see, you can probably see it on the boards when you come up, a sidewalk that goes through the hedgerow to the community garden. And there'll be 1 or 2 handicap spaces of parking there. That's what I would foresee. So that the gardens could be accessed by people with physical disabilities easier.
And what about the potential expansion area? Is that?
Well, I just put that in there because I know how things over time grow, because it becomes very popular and you want it to grow. And the only area it could really grow to is out into this area, because out this way is past the property line. And then there's existing vegetation in some areas here that, might be able to go into, but most of your area is in this pink rectangle that could go, like the actual garden itself could be expanded. And that might be where you do accessible beds too.
Yeah, there's already a question as to whether we're over the property line, so we have to address that. But I mean, but there definitely is space to expand it, I think.
Yeah.
Thierry Corey, I live on Harborview Road. First, I really like the work that you have done generally. I think you put a lot of effort in it. I just wanted to make a comment, which is a very small detail. Along the trails, the very thin lines, I was wondering if you were thinking at some point to have, from distance to distance, some benches so that people who walk can sit down. I'm thinking about that because I sometimes walk around Gordon's Pond, in the park by the water there. I forgot the name, sorry. Cape and Open Park. And there's just 1 or 2 places where you can sit, and sometimes I find it difficult, to go the way around.
That's an excellent question, and I would suggest, yes, that there would be benches, and that could be something done like as a donation type thing. You see a lot of benches donated by people in honor of somebody or in memory of somebody. That could be a perfect opportunity for that along these areas. And then the other part of the gathering area is kind of like spread out too, is that you have these little points of rest that would have seating areas somehow in it. But yes, that's a definite good question, and I think it can be addressed in the master plan.
Well, especially when we create some kind of a trail system, there may be natural places where you would want a bench or a gathering spot, for more than a couple of people.
Hi, I'm Mary Linda Maddie, and my question is, if you were to do this whole project as presented, what is the estimated cost?
It's too early to say about that right now. Once we get a master plan with all the different elements that we want to see, then we might be able to do like a budgetary estimate, but you really need to have engineered plans of what you're going to do actually to get a cost. So this is very early in the process, so I can't really say that right now.
And once we do get to that point where we can put together a budget, there are many grant opportunities that can assist with funding. So, but I think we've got to have that concept in the budget. But there was a question here, Larry.
Okay, so I'm concerned personally about the trail behind the Canary Creek houses for safety. Also, it's an area that's full of deer, and so I don't think the trail will actually be walkable because of the intense level of ticks through there. So build a trail that, you know, invades our privacy that nobody can use doesn't seem logical to me. And I'm also concerned about taking down the trees. The meadow sounds real pretty, but there's trees there. So you'd be taking down trees on both sides of the park, plus for the trails. And the trees are protecting us from flooding, and flooding is a huge problem, as you know. So that's my concerns. The other thing, I looked at the Cape Gazette article about the last meeting and the spots that we voted last time. The Nature Preserve and No Change had 29 spots, and sculptures had 3. So I think the sculpture shouldn't have a priority.
Okay, I just want to say to Sue about the edges and the meadow where the trees would come out. Almost entirely planted along the edges, or existing along the edges, are Bradford pear, autumn olive, there's Rosa multiflora, and I think there's something else too that's not good. There might be a couple of those.
But don't they still protect against flooding even if they're invasive?
Well, my intent would be, so does the meadow. The meadow would also help with flooding because it helps with water infiltration. But my intent would be, once we do a meadow in the front, you're still going to have some disturbance with the edge of the trees. So that's where we plant native species of understory trees like sweet bay magnolia, flowering dogwood, South Carolina fringe tree, eastern redbud, and then also some shrubbery that's native too. Because your edges are always the places where the most sun gets, so that's where invasives like to take root. But if we can pack it full of native species and get it established, then that's not going to let the invasives come back. That's the intent of that one.
Invasives in general are not the best for the filtration. I mean, the natives are the best for filtration. Right. The invasives are not as good. People that haven't commented.
Right, Barry, right here. You wanted to say? No. Yeah.
I'm Linda Seidel, and I also live in Canary Creek. The Meadows. I haven't seen, I've seen several places where meadow was intended, and it ends up looking like ragged and weeds, and eventually trees do come up in there. And to have that on Park, where it's kind of where everyone sees it, that's going to be you're going to go through and see it. Where now, even though it's invasive that we're talking about, you're seeing a pretty green with different varieties and things in there. You're not seeing a flat sea, even though it is, you know, waving and would be pretty. It would be pretty if it ends up being what you said. I'm going by in front of Dover High School in Dover. They put an area that would be natural, and it would be flowers, and it would be what you're saying, and it looks like a pile of weeds. In front of the high school, it looks so unkept and so, you know, I'm all for natural.
Right.
There's nobody in this room likes natural more than I do. But when it's just unkept looking like that, to me, and flat, that does not look
Right.
as...
And the way that is controlled, with not letting other trees in and keeping the weeds out,
Maintain it.
is a proper maintenance calendar. It would have to be the
We
city.
have a meadow in Canary Creek
But
that we're managing.
But who's gonna take care of that? Our taxes.
But here's the thing too about a meadow. Let me just clarify on how some things are done with meadows. So the first couple years, it can look kind of ratty because it's trying to get established. The important thing is mowing and when it's mowed, because there's usually like 2 mowings a year, and the first mowing is critical because it's usually after the first spring wildflowers come up, but it's before the weeds go to seed. And that way, the weeds can't take root and get established. And then it's also mowed again, usually in the fall. I recommend leaving it go because during the autumn and winter months, the meadow still provides habitat, cover, protective cover, and even some food sources for native wildlife. And what were you going to say, Jen?
Well, I just wanted to add that the city, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the park system in the city. We have several parks. Some are large, some are small. They're all different. They have a different feel. They have a different function. They have a different purpose. Each park has a commissioner, and each park and each commissioner has a budget. For as long as we've had Great Marsh Park, which is from 2006, we've not had a commissioner. We've paid zero attention to it. So last year, the city appointed Barry the commissioner for this park. And we saw the window of opportunity closing on getting this master plan done and the potential of losing that park altogether. So again, it goes back to your question in the back about how much this is going to cost. Part of that cost is having a budget for the park so that we can manage it, because it has been completely unmanaged. And this process alone was put into that park budget. So we could get professional skills to help us with this. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I don't know that people really understand that process.
Hi, I'm Paula Fennessy from Harbor Point, and one of the things, I mean, a lot of what you described sounds lovely, and it's always nice to have a park, but given the scope and costs, what I'm not understanding is why more of the park and the trails were not developed on the side of Park Road that does not have any housing developments, because we're also concerned about having trails that cross over the entrances to the developments. And when you talked about bathrooms, if you have people on these trails and there are no bathrooms, they're going to be, when there are people who need to take care of things, they're going to be close to the entrances to the developments. They're going to be, again, whether it's binoculars or people get curious and they're off the trail. The trails seem to be very close. I mean, they're not just very close, they're crossing the entranceways where, someone's walking there and it's, people are going to work, they're coming back, they're going to school, people pick up their kids. The school bus stops on these entrance roads to pick up and drop off children. And now you have people who will be walking literally across the entranceways. Why there aren't more trails put on the other side? Because, again, a park is lovely, but there is the space, and why they weren't, outlined. I mean, I see space where there is nothing and there are no housing developments being affected.
Right. Well,
By the way, most of the park is surrounded by other houses. That other side's surrounded by houses also.
There's houses all here and houses down here. I think you were talking about this area where the trails cross the road, right? The entrances?
Going across Canary Creek and Harbor.
Right. Well, there's also existing crosswalks in the road right now. And my intent was like, this is kind of like the hub where everything kind of crosses each other. And there's already crosswalks there for safe pedestrian crossing. So all these links kind of come to this point, and then from this point, you can go this way, you can go this way, you can go this way, or you can go on this way. There's right here, there's a crosswalk right here. Oh, this one here?
Yeah.
Okay.
that one.
Yeah.
Lower, and there's an observation center, so G3 would be an observation center.
Yeah.
So that there are houses on the other side of the Great Marsh where they're going to observe, they've got the binoculars, they're gonna be looking, in their house.
And this is actually where we kind of walked as a community. We walked through here because there was open gaps within the canopy and trees that we could actually walk through here. We walked all the way back here, and this is the part closest to the marsh itself. When you go up this side, there's the educational research for the University of Delaware outside the property boundary. So this place here was one of the most, the closest ones to the marsh that we could have some sort of overlook. The other ones up here in the top in the pines area. But that's why we had this link here, is because we actually walked through here and thought that was a potential point of entry. But I mean, if you guys are not happy with that, we do not need to share that.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing should walk through it. It's not that wide.
Could you not build the tower so that it was facing that way and on the other
I
side
personally don't
toward
think you
the...
would be able to see in there.
The other thing too is that this is where the bluebirds are,
In my house here? Yes, I can. My grandsons were back in the NBC, you know.
Yeah, it's all grass.
yeah.
So this space right here, where we're talking about it's too close,
Yeah.
this is over 300 feet wide from the property boundary to the road. The area over here by the University of Delaware research area, there's actually like a meadow trying to get established. There's also lawn. But we saw lots of bluebirds and other birds in that area already. Just FYI.
I think it could be designed with those concerns.
Has the impact to the communities where this is planned to go through has there been a study of the impact of the communities, and have the communities been notified that this is potentially going through there?
Well, we talked
That's
about.
what this process is, yeah.
I'm talking about, this is a small article in the Gazette, having...
I think everybody in the city of Lewis got a postcard for the first meeting.
For the first one,
Yes.
Nothing.
Everybody that was a city taxpayer.
There was an email notification, if you had signed up for City of Lewis email notifications, it went out that way. It was posted, as all public meetings and workshops are, a week in advance, and it was also posted on the city website.
Other comments? Concerns?
I do have a concern about the proposal for additional parking near the dog park. I know a number of people in our community, and probably the surrounding communities as well, walk their dogs down to the dog park. And there isn't any way to get off the road unless you get into the ditch. So I think it's a potential for danger, especially if cars are pulling out and parking there. Yeah, so that's my comment about the additional parking there. And by the way, Paul is correct. There's not enough parking there as it is for the dog park people. I noticed that is a problem.
What, is there any data on the use of the dog park as far as time of day when it's particularly busy versus less busy?
Yes, I have. It's a fob system that is used to access. I have a database that shows people going in, not necessarily going out.
Okay.
So I can show, what the uses are. And I can tell you, there's a big group that goes in at sunrise. There's another group that goes in about 8, another group at 10.
Okay.
Go over there at noon, which is when I go, there's almost nobody there. And then it starts filling in again around 3, 5, and 7.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug Spellman. Just my comments would be twofold. One, in regards to the area around the dog park, we think it's all pristine and everything, but I walk my dog there every day. And I pick up a beer can, a wine bottle on that path virtually every day. So people are in there in the evening that come in and park and do whatever. So that's just a concern for the big overview, that we need some additional policing or some more general policing, I think, in that area. Secondly, I think your environmental plan is good in terms of invasives and lessening those. But I'd be very opposed to any hardscape. You know, pine trails, needles, things like that are great, but structures, and like it was said earlier, I don't think there's much demand for sculpture in the park, or, you know, those types of things. Thank you.
Would there be any desire for some sort of gate at the front of the access drive that can be closed at, you know, dusk at the end of the day so that cars can't access the area? Would that be something that you think would help with people going there after hours or not? Yeah.
I mean, I think that's certainly an option if we could do that. I mean, Cape Henlopen closes parts of the Henlopen.
It would have to be somebody with the parking.
I mean, it's an option. Cape Henlopen closes part of their park at night. There's certain parts of that park you can't go.
And I'm not talking about a solid gate or even a chain link gate. I'm talking about just a couple of bars that come across the road right after the intersection that shows people you cannot access that area when it's closed. That's all I'm suggesting.
Well, I mean, there's ways to address that with police and, you know.
Well, I mean,
nothing's going to be perfect.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was just responding to the number of people that say people park in there overnight, stay over there overnight, access that parking area around the circle. I was just responding to that, and if this could be part of a solution for that.
Other comments?
You know, having heard everybody here, I think the elephant in the room here is the following question. Is the desire to make the park here a destination? Or do we just want to keep it as a place where people occasionally go, well, because they happen to live in the neighborhood and they walk their dog or they bike ride and they stop a few minutes on a trail or something like that. And in my mind, from what I've seen in your presentation, it's not clear whether we are trying to make this a destination, and I heard some people certainly, I feel, are not in favor of this becoming a destination, or are we trying to keep it as something very local and therefore with a lesser impact? And I wonder if, you know, we need to have a discussion on this.
That's an excellent question.
I mean, this property is for all the citizens of Lewis. It's not a local park.
But is it for the city of Lewis?
Yeah.
Or is it the
It's for the
entire
city.
Lewis that goes all the way up to?
It's
20?
technically, it's for the area. We're not, you know, just like people come to our tennis courts from all over. But we're not designing a park for two communities. We're designing a park for the entire city. I think that needs to be clear.
And also, I just want to point out too, this is a very unique site where you have both vehicular circulation and bicycles and joggers and walkers that actually go through the park. So how do you get those people to experience the park if they don't even go off to the side to the dog park or go off and park at the community garden? Like, the people that go through that space are also experiencing the Great Marsh Park. So how do we make it special for those people just as much as special for everybody else that actually go there?
They don't want bikes in there, they'll be running over people.
They already go through the
Yeah,
park.
there's lots of bicyclists
Well,
along.
that's on the big main road, that's different.
That's part of the park.
That's, yeah, I don't foresee bicyclists going on the, like, cross-country road or trail.
Not developing.
We
No.
didn't talk about developing bike trails. That was not,
I mean, it's really nice to walk through there now, it's quiet, you don't see anybody, it's peaceful, you don't hear people, you know, and it is nice. But we don't need to stop and sit and have bird thing, and, you don't need all that stuff, you're wasting money.
you don't. Maybe you don't, but maybe others in the city do. That, I mean, that's kind of what,
So,
um,
yeah, one thing that I would just like to add is that this is a city park. It is managed to the extent that we can. But parks are public. They are meant for everybody. We have other parks in the city that border neighborhoods. And yes, the residents around those parks have concerns, but I think everybody has really adapted to them. When you look at George H.P. Smith Park, Stango Park, Swanendale Park. So I just want people to keep in mind that parks are public, whether it's a city park, a state park, a national park. And inclusivity and equity and diversity for all of our residents and visitors is important. Ed?
The initial concept for this park is 20 years old. Long before a lot of those houses were even thought of. We're not an exclusive kind of town. We're an open town. We want to get that way. We have an opportunity to preserve and improve this space for everyone. And everybody needs to get off of this exclusivity trip.
No, it's not
Now,
exclusive.
excuse me.
It's just, you know,
No, it's exclusive. You should have talked to your realtor. This, long term, this is always on there. This was coming. Talk to your realtor and developers.
thanks, Ed. People that